My name is Valerie Brooks, and last Christmas, in front of 20 relatives, my father stood up during dinner and announced I'd be paying rent if I wanted to keep living under his roof. No private conversation. No warning. Just a public decree while everyone held their forks midair. But what he didn't know was that I'd already found the storage unit. I'd already seen the documents. And I'd already figured out where my grandmother's money actually went. This isn't a story about being kicked out. It's about what happens when you stop asking for permission to exist and start demanding answers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The snow started falling around 3 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve. Big, slow flakes that stuck to the windows and made everything look softer than it actually was. I was in the kitchen peeling potatoes when my mother walked in and set a stack of red cloth napkins on the counter without looking at me. "Dinner's at 6 sharp tomorrow," she said. "Your father wants everyone seated by then." I nodded, keeping my hands busy. Diane Brooks had perfected the art of speaking to me without actually speaking to me. Every sentence was clipped, functional, like I was staff and not her daughter. "Is Ethan bringing anyone?" I asked, more to fill the silence than because I cared. "He'll be here with Claire," she replied. "And before you ask, yes, they're sitting at the main table." I wasn't going to ask, but the fact that she mentioned it told me everything. There was a main table, and then there was wherever I'd end up. Probably near the kids or next to Aunt Lorraine, who everyone politely ignored because she asked too many questions. My mother left without another word, and I kept peeling. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar from the pie crusts she'd baked earlier. It should have felt warm. It should have felt like home. But the house on Maple Ridge Drive had stopped feeling like home a long time ago. I just didn't have anywhere else to go yet. I'd been living here for 8 months. After my lease ended on a cramped apartment across town, my father had offered to let me stay temporarily while I saved up for a down payment. Temporarily became permanent when rent prices in Ashford skyrocketed and my nonprofit salary stayed frozen. I kept telling myself it was just until I found something affordable. But deep down, I knew I was stuck. That night, I went upstairs to my old bedroom. It hadn't changed much since high school. Same pale yellow walls, same desk shoved against the window, same closet that never fully closed. But now it felt smaller, like the room itself was rejecting me. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. There was a text from Natalie, my friend from college who still lived in Portland. "You surviving the holiday torture?" I typed back. "Barely. Tomorrow's the big dinner. Preparing for maximum awkwardness." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. She was choosing her words carefully. "You ever think about just leaving? Like, not telling anyone, just packing up and going?" I stared at the message for a long time. Of course I'd thought about it. But leaving meant admitting I'd failed. It meant proving my father right when he said I couldn't make it on my own. And some stubborn part of me refused to give him that satisfaction. The next morning, Christmas Day, the house filled with noise. Relatives arrived in waves, stomping snow off their boots, handing off casserole dishes and bottles of wine. My Uncle Greg clapped my father on the back and made some joke about the stock market. My Aunt Lorraine cornered me in the hallway and asked if I was eating enough. "You look thin," she said, studying my face. "I'm fine," I lied. She didn't look convinced, but someone called her name from the living room, and she disappeared into the crowd. Ethan arrived late, as always, with his girlfriend Claire hanging off his arm. She wore a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and her laugh was loud and frequent, the kind designed to make sure everyone knew she was having a good time. "Valerie," Ethan said, grinning as he pulled me into a one-armed hug that felt more like a performance than affection. "Merry Christmas. Still crashing in your old room?" The comment landed exactly how he intended. A few people nearby glanced over, smiling politely but clearly listening. "For now," I said evenly. Claire looked around the house with wide eyes. "This place is gorgeous." Ethan said you guys grew up here? We did, I answered. Our grandmother used to live next door before she passed. Oh, that's so sweet, Claire said, though her tone suggested she wasn't actually interested. Ethan steered her toward the living room, and I exhaled slowly. 8 months of this. 8 months of being treated like a guest in the house I grew up in. 8 months of watching my younger brother get every benefit of the doubt while I got every suspicion. Dinner was set up in the dining room, which my mother had decorated within an inch of its life. Candles, garland, gold-rimmed plates that only came out twice a year. The main table seated 12. I counted the place cards as people filtered in. My father at the head. My mother to his right. Ethan and Claire beside her. Uncle Greg and Aunt Patty. 2 cousins I barely spoke to. Aunt Lorraine at the far end. And me? I found my name on a folding table in the adjoining sunroom, next to my 9-year-old cousin and someone's boyfriend who looked just as confused as I felt. I sat down and smoothed the napkin across my lap. The noise from the main room was loud, layered with laughter and the clinking of glasses. From where I sat, I could see my father's profile. Kenneth Brooks had a square jaw and gray temples that made him look distinguished, the kind of man people trusted in business. He was talking to Uncle Greg about interest rates, gesturing with his wine glass. My mother appeared at my side, holding a basket of rolls. She set it down without a word and moved back toward the main table. I took a roll just to have something to do with my hands. The meal started smoothly enough. People passed dishes, complimented the food, asked polite questions about jobs and vacations. My cousin next to me was more interested in his handheld game than talking, which suited me fine. Then, halfway through the main course, my father stood up. The room quieted instantly. Kenneth Brooks didn't stand during dinner unless he had something important to say. I want to take a moment, he began, his voice carrying easily across both rooms, to thank everyone for being here. Family is everything, and it's nights like this that remind us what really matters. Murmurs of agreement. Someone said, "Here, here." He continued. This past year has been a time of growth and change for the Brooks family. Ethan's restaurant is opening in March, and we couldn't be prouder. Applause. Ethan raised his glass sheepishly, and Claire beamed beside him. But growth also means making tough decisions, my father went on. It means holding people accountable and ensuring everyone contributes their fair share. My stomach tightened. Which brings me to an announcement. Starting February 1st, anyone living in this house who isn't a dependent minor will be expected to pay rent. That includes you, Valerie. The room went silent. Not the polite kind of silence. The kind where people stopped chewing. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. My face burned, but I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded in my lap. We think $800 a month is fair, he continued, as if he were discussing a business transaction. Utilities included. It's more than reasonable given the market. Someone coughed. Aunt Lorraine set down her fork with a sharp clink. Kenneth, she said carefully, is this really the time? It's the perfect time, he replied smoothly. Valerie's a grown woman. She has a job. It's time she learned what real responsibility looks like. I didn't move. Didn't speak. I just sat there, feeling the weight of his words pressed down on me like a physical thing. Ethan shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Claire looked between us, sensing the tension but unsure how to react. My mother sipped her wine and stared at the centerpiece. No one defended me. No one said, maybe we should discuss this privately. No one said anything at all. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and walked out of the sunroom without looking back. Behind me, I heard my father say, "She'll come around. She always does." I grabbed my coat from the hallway closet, shoved my feet into my boots, and walked out the front door into the cold. The snow was still falling, heavier now, and the air bit at my cheeks. I walked down Maple Ridge Drive with no destination in mind, just moving because staying still felt impossible. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Natalie. What happened? I typed back with numb fingers. He did it in front of everyone. Told me I have to pay rent starting next month. Her response was immediate. That's insane. Can you afford that? I stopped walking and looked up at the sky. Snowflakes landed on my eyelashes and melted instantly. The honest answer was no. My salary at the nonprofit barely covered my car payment, groceries, and student loans. $800 a month would wipe me out. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that he knew that. He knew exactly what he was doing. I don't know, I finally replied. Come stay with me. Seriously. I have a couch. I appreciated the offer, but Portland was 2 hours away, and I couldn't just leave my job. I couldn't just run. Not yet. I walked for another 20 minutes before circling back. When I stepped inside, the house was quieter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dessert had been served, and people were scattered between the living room and kitchen. I slipped upstairs unnoticed and locked myself in my room. That's when I started thinking about my grandmother. Margaret Brooks had passed away 3 years ago, and she'd left behind a duplex on the east side of town. 2 units, both rented out. It wasn't glamorous, but it generated steady income. In her will, she'd split everything between her 2 grandchildren. Me and Ethan. 50-50. But I'd never seen a dime. At the time, my father had explained that the property was being managed through a trust, and the income was being reinvested for future distribution. I'd been too grief-stricken to ask questions. Too trusting to demand details. Now, sitting alone in my childhood bedroom on Christmas night, I realized I'd never actually seen the trust documents. I'd never seen a statement. I'd never seen proof of anything. I opened my laptop and started searching. Property records for Ashford, Oregon. I typed in my grandmother's name, then the address I remembered, 428 Riverside Avenue. The record loaded slowly. Owner of record, Kenneth R. Brooks. Sole proprietor. Not a trust. Not split between grandchildren. Just him. I sat back, staring at the screen. My hands were shaking. He'd told me the property was in a trust. He'd told me the money was being saved. He'd looked me in the eye and lied. I clicked through more records. Transfer date, November 2021. 4 months after my grandmother died. I grabbed my phone and called Aunt Lorraine. She picked up on the second ring, her voice low. Valerie? Are you okay? I need to ask you something, I said. About Grandma Margaret's duplex. There was a long pause. What about it? Dad told me it was in a trust. That the money was being reinvested. But I just looked up the property records, and it's only in his name. Do you know anything about that? Another pause, longer this time. Oh, honey. Those 2 words told me everything. I knew something wasn't right, she said quietly. Your grandmother told me she wanted that property split between you and Ethan. She said it explicitly. But after she passed, Kenneth handled everything. He said it was easier for tax purposes to keep it under one name temporarily. Temporarily, I repeated. That was 3 years ago, Valerie. I closed my eyes. Did Ethan know? I don't know. But if I had to guess? Yes. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat there in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of my family laughing downstairs, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to ask my father for an explanation. I wasn't going to beg for what was mine. I was going to find out exactly what he'd done, document every lie, and take back what my grandmother intended me to have. But first, I needed to see that duplex for myself. The next morning, I woke up early, before anyone else stirred. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I dressed quickly, grabbed my keys, and slipped out the side door. The drive to Riverside Avenue took 15 minutes. The duplex sat on a corner lot, pale blue with white trim and a shared front porch. Both units had separate entrances. One side had a wreath on the door. The other had a small pile of Amazon boxes stacked near the steps. I parked across the street and watched. A woman in her 30s came out of the left unit, carrying a toddler on her hip. She loaded the kid into a car seat, then drove off. I waited another 10 minutes, then walked up to the porch. There was a lockbox attached to the railing, the kind landlords use for showings. I tried the code my grandmother used to use for everything, her birthday, 0425. It clicked open. Inside was a single key. I unlocked the right unit and stepped inside. The air smelled stale, like the place had been empty for a while. The furniture was minimal. A couch, a coffee table, a small kitchen table. The walls were blank except for a few nail holes. I walked through slowly, opening closets, checking cabinets. In the bedroom, I found a stack of mail on the dresser. All addressed to Kenneth Brooks. Rent checks, utility bills, a notice from the county assessor. I took photos of everything. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer beneath the oven. People always forget to check those. Inside was a folder, old and bent at the edges. I pulled it out and flipped it open. Lease agreements. Signed by tenants. Countersigned by Kenneth Brooks, landlord. Rental income logs, handwritten. $1,200 per unit, per month. That was $2,400 total. For 3 years. I did the math in my head. Over $80,000. Money that should have been split between me and Ethan. Money I'd never seen. At the bottom of the folder was a photocopy of my grandmother's will. I scanned it quickly, my heart pounding. There it was, in her handwriting at the bottom of the typed document. The duplex at 428 Riverside Avenue is to be divided equally between my grandchildren, Valerie Brooks and Ethan Brooks, to provide them security and independence. I took a photo of every page. Then I put everything back exactly how I found it, locked the door, and left. When I got home, my father was in the kitchen making coffee. He glanced up when I walked in. "Out early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded, unbothered. "You'll need to let me know by the end of the week if you're planning to stay. I'll need first and last month up front." I poured myself a glass of water and kept my voice steady. "I'll let you know." He went back to his coffee, and I went upstairs. Once I was alone, I opened my laptop and started typing. Every detail. Every document. Every lie. And then I searched for attorneys in Ashford who specialized in estate disputes. Because this wasn't just about rent anymore. This was about everything he'd taken. And I was going to make sure he gave it back. The law office of Gregory Walsh sat above a coffee shop on 3rd Street, tucked between a vintage clothing store and a tax preparation service. I climbed the narrow staircase on a Tuesday morning, clutching a manila folder that contained every photo, every document, every piece of evidence I'd gathered over the past week. The waiting room was small but clean, with outdated magazines and a reception desk manned by a woman in her 50s who smiled warmly when I walked in. "You must be Valerie. Gregory's expecting you." She led me down a short hallway to an office that smelled like old books and coffee. Gregory Walsh stood when I entered, extending his hand. He was shorter than I expected, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on top of his head. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice," I said, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "Estate disputes don't wait for convenient timing," he replied, settling back into his seat. "Tell me what's going on." I opened the folder and slid the first photo across the desk. My grandmother left a duplex to me and my brother. Equal split. But my father transferred the entire property into his name 4 months after she died. He's been collecting rent for 3 years and never told me. Gregory picked up the photo, studying it carefully. He pulled another image toward him, then another, his expression growing more focused with each one. This is the original will, I said, pointing. You can see her handwriting at the bottom. She wanted us to have security and independence. And this, he said, tapping the property record, shows your father as sole owner. No trust. No co-ownership. Exactly. He sat back, folding his hands. How much rental income are we talking about? 1,200 per unit. 2 units. 3 years. He did the calculations silently. That's over $80,000. I nodded. And I've never seen a penny. Gregory removed his glasses and set them on the desk. Valerie, what I'm looking at here is potential estate fraud. If your grandmother's will explicitly named you and your brother as beneficiaries, and your father transferred the property without proper legal authority, that's a serious issue. Can we fix it? We can try. But I need you to understand something. Cases like this get messy. Families fall apart. People say things they can't take back. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Christmas dinner. I thought about my father standing up in front of everyone, announcing my rent like I was a tenant and not his daughter. I thought about the years of being treated like an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. I'm already living in it, I said. I just want what's mine. Gregory nodded slowly. Then let's get started. He spent the next hour asking questions. When did my grandmother die? Who was the executor of the estate? Did I receive any documentation after her passing? Had I signed anything? Did my brother know about the property transfer? I answered everything I could. Some things I didn't know. I hadn't been included in the estate proceedings. My father had handled everything privately, and I'd trusted him. That trust felt like the most expensive mistake of my life. Before I left, Gregory gave me a list of documents to find. Bank statements, old family records, anything with my grandmother's signature. He also told me to stop talking to my father about the property. Don't give him a chance to cover his tracks, Gregory said. And don't tell your brother yet either. We need to see how deep this goes before people start choosing sides. I walked out of his office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because someone finally believed me. Heavier because I knew what came next would tear everything apart. That evening, I drove to my grandmother's old house. My father had sold it a year after she passed, but I still remembered where she kept things. I needed to find her personal records, and I had one idea where to look. The new owners had renovated the front porch, but the backyard looked the same. There was a small shed near the fence, painted green and mostly forgotten. My grandmother used to store gardening tools and holiday decorations in there. But she also kept a fireproof box hidden under a tarp in the back corner. I parked a block away and walked up the alley. The gate was unlocked. I slipped into the yard, hoping the new owners weren't home. The shed door creaked when I opened it. Inside, it smelled like dust and motor oil. I clicked on my phone's flashlight and scanned the space. Shelves lined both walls, filled with paint cans and coiled hoses. In the back corner, beneath a blue tarp, I found it. The box was smaller than I remembered, gray metal with a combination lock. I tried her birthday again. It opened. Inside were papers, neatly stacked and bundled with rubber bands. Birth certificates. Marriage license. Deed to the duplex from 1987. And underneath all of that, a handwritten ledger. I pulled it out carefully. The pages were filled with her slanted cursive. Dates, amounts, notes. Rent collected from Riverside property. Deposit to savings account for Valerie and Ethan. Set aside for their futures. She'd been tracking it. Every payment. Every deposit. She'd intended the money to go directly to us, not through my father. I took photos of every page, then carefully returned everything to the box. I locked it and placed it back under the tarp exactly as I'd found it. When I got home, my mother was in the living room folding laundry. She looked up briefly when I walked in. Where have you been? Out. She didn't press. Diane Brooks had perfected the art of knowing just enough to maintain deniability. I wondered how much she actually knew about the duplex. How much she'd chosen not to see. I went upstairs and sent the photos to Gregory. Then I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. My phone buzzed. "Natalie. How's it going?" I typed back. Found my grandmother's ledger. She tracked every payment. She wanted the money to go to me and Ethan directly. "So your dad just took it?" "Looks that way." "Valerie, you need to get out of that house." "I know. Working on it." But the truth was, I didn't have anywhere to go. Not yet. And part of me didn't want to leave before I'd finished what I started. Running felt too much like losing. The next few days passed in a strange fog. I went to work, answered emails, attended meetings. But my mind was somewhere else, cataloging every interaction with my father, every offhand comment, every time he'd made me feel small. At the nonprofit, my coworker Rachel asked if I was okay. I told her I was just tired. She didn't push, but I could see the concern in her eyes. On Thursday, I received an email from Gregory. He'd filed a petition with the county probate court to reopen my grandmother's estate. A hearing was scheduled for late January. "This is going to move quickly now," he wrote. "Be prepared for your father to respond. And don't be surprised if he reaches out directly." He didn't have to wait long. That night, I came home to find my father sitting in the living room with a stack of papers on the coffee table. He looked up when I walked in, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Valerie." I stayed standing. "What's this about?" He tapped the papers. "I received a notice today from the probate court. You filed a petition against me." I didn't say anything. "You want to explain why you're trying to reopen your grandmother's estate?" "Because you lied to me," I said. "You told me the duplex was in a trust. You told me the money was being saved. But you transferred the property into your name and kept every dollar for yourself." His jaw tightened. "That property required management. Maintenance. Legal fees. Someone had to handle it. And you couldn't split the income like Grandma wanted?" "It wasn't that simple." "It was exactly that simple," I said. "She left it to me and Ethan equally. You chose to keep it all." He stood, his height suddenly imposing in the small room. "You have no idea what it takes to manage a property. No idea what I've dealt with. Tenants, repairs, taxes. You think money just appears?" "I found her ledger," I said quietly. "I know she was setting aside the rent for us. I know you were supposed to pass it along." His expression shifted, just slightly. A flicker of something. Surprise, maybe. Or anger. "That ledger doesn't mean anything. It was her intention, not a legal document. Her will was a legal document. And it said equal split." He exhaled sharply through his nose, the way he always did when he was losing an argument. "You're making a mistake, Valerie. You're going to tear this family apart over money." "You already did that," I said. "You just didn't expect me to notice." I turned and walked upstairs before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but my voice had stayed steady, and that felt like a victory. The next morning, I received a text from Ethan. "We need to talk." I didn't respond right away. I knew this was coming. Ethan had always been the mediator, the one who smoothed things over. But he was also the one who benefited most from staying in my father's good graces. He called an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. On the third try, I picked up. "What do you want, Ethan?" "What do I want?" He sounded incredulous. "I want to know why you're suing Dad." "I'm not suing him. I'm petitioning to reopen Grandma's estate because he lied about the duplex." There was a pause. "Valerie, you don't understand the full situation." "Then explain it to me." He sighed. "Dad took over the property because someone had to. Grandma didn't leave clear instructions about management. He did what he thought was best. She left a will, I said. And a ledger. She wanted the rent split between us. Did you know he was keeping all of it? Another pause, longer this time. I knew he was managing it. Did you know he never planned to give me my share? Silence. That's what I thought, I said, and hung up. 10 minutes later, my mother knocked on my door. She didn't wait for me to answer before opening it. Your father is very upset, she said. You need to drop this. No. She blinked, as if she hadn't expected me to refuse outright. Valerie, be reasonable. This is going to cost thousands in legal fees. It's going to hurt everyone. It already hurt me, I said. I'm just making sure everyone else feels it too. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation. Part of me wondered if I was being vindictive. If I was letting anger drive me instead of logic. But then I thought about the ledger, about my grandmother's careful handwriting, about the life I could have built with that money. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being fair. The following week, I started looking for apartments. I couldn't afford much, but I found a studio on the south side of town for $900 a month. It was smaller than my current room and had a radiator that clanked, but it was mine. I put down a deposit and signed the lease. Move-in date, February 1st. The same day my father wanted me to start paying rent. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not yet. At work, I kept my head down and focused on a grant application that was due at the end of the month. My supervisor, Angela, called me into her office one afternoon. Everything okay, Valerie? You seem distracted. I'm fine. Just dealing with some family stuff. She nodded sympathetically. If you need time off, let me know. We can make it work. I appreciated the offer, but taking time off felt like admitting defeat. I needed the routine. I needed something in my life that wasn't falling apart. On the last Saturday of January, I went back to the duplex. I wanted to see if anything had changed, if my father had tried to hide evidence or alter records. The lockbox was still there, and the code still worked. Inside the left unit, the woman with the toddler was home. I could hear cartoons playing through the thin walls. I knocked gently on her door. She opened it cautiously, the toddler perched on her hip. Can I help you? Hi, I'm Valerie. My grandmother used to own this building. I'm just checking on a few things. Do you mind if I ask who you pay rent to? She looked confused. Kenneth Brooks. He's the landlord. Have you ever had any issues? Repairs, anything like that? Not really. He's pretty hands-off. There was a leak last year, but it got fixed eventually. I thanked her and left. The right unit was still empty. I let myself in again and walked through slowly, taking in the details I'd missed before. In the bathroom, I found a small nail hole above the towel rack. It looked recent. I knelt down and peered into the hole. There was something inside, a rolled-up piece of paper. I used a pen to work it free. It was a receipt from a hardware store, dated 2 weeks ago. Kenneth Brooks. Lockbox replacement. He'd changed the locks after my first visit. He knew I'd been here. I took a photo of the receipt and left quickly, my heart pounding. He was covering his tracks. Which meant he knew I was serious. Back at the house, I went straight to my room and sent the photo to Gregory. His response came within minutes. Good work. This shows consciousness of guilt. Keep documenting everything. That evening, my father was at the dining table with a stack of financial statements spread out in front of him. He looked up when I passed by. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. I stopped in the doorway. Maybe. But at least I'll regret something I chose to do, not something I let happen to me. He didn't respond. I went upstairs and started packing. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Gregory called me the night before to go over what to expect. The judge will review the petition and the evidence. Your father's attorney will argue that he had authority to manage the property as executor. We'll argue that he exceeded that authority and failed to distribute assets as specified in the will. What are our chances? Honestly? 50-50. Estate law is tricky. But the ledger helps. It shows clear intent. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept rehearsing what I'd say if the judge asked me questions. Kept imagining my father's face across the courtroom. The next morning, I dressed carefully. A navy blazer, simple jewelry, no makeup that could smudge if I cried. I wanted to look composed. Credible. Gregory met me outside the courthouse. It was a modern building, all glass and concrete, and my footsteps echoed as we walked through the lobby. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Rows of benches, a judge's bench at the front, tables for each side. My father was already seated with his attorney, a woman in a sharp gray suit. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Ethan sat in the back row. I hadn't expected him to come. Our eyes met briefly, and he looked away. The judge entered, a man in his 60s with a tired expression. He reviewed the file silently, then looked up. This is a petition to reopen the estate of Margaret Brooks, deceased. Miss Brooks, you're alleging that the property at 428 Riverside Avenue was improperly transferred. Is that correct? Gregory stood. Yes, Your Honor. The decedent's will clearly specifies that the property was to be divided equally between her two grandchildren. Instead, the executor transferred the entire property into his own name and has collected rental income for 3 years without distribution. The judge turned to my father's attorney. Response? She stood smoothly. Your Honor, Mr. Brooks acted within his authority as executor. The will granted him discretion to manage assets during the settlement period. The property required significant repairs and oversight, and he used the rental income to cover those expenses. Gregory countered. We have the decedent's personal ledger showing that she intended the rental income to be set aside specifically for her grandchildren. This wasn't a management decision. This was a conversion of assets. The judge asked to see the ledger. Gregory handed it over, and the room fell silent as the judge flipped through the pages. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up. I'm going to order an accounting of all rental income and expenses related to this property for the past 3 years. Mr. Brooks, you'll provide detailed records within 30 days. We'll reconvene after that. He banged the gavel, and it was over. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss either. My father would have to show where the money went. And if he couldn't prove it was spent on legitimate expenses, I'd get what was mine. Outside the courthouse, Ethan caught up to me. Valerie, wait. I turned. What? I didn't know he was keeping everything. I swear. But you knew he was managing it. You knew he wasn't splitting the rent. And you didn't ask questions. He looked down. I should have. Yeah, I said. You should have. I walked away before he could say anything else. Gregory was waiting by his car. That went well, he said. The judge is taking this seriously. What happens now? Now we wait. And we see if your father can justify $80,000 in expenses. I nodded, feeling exhausted and wired at the same time. One more thing, Gregory said. Be careful. People do desperate things when they're cornered. I thought about the changed locks, the receipt, the way my father had looked at me in the courtroom. I know, I said. I'm ready. February arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that made everything feel harder than it was. I spent the first weekend of the month moving my things into the studio apartment on the south side. Natalie drove down from Portland to help, her car loaded with boxes and garbage bags full of clothes I'd stuffed hastily the night before. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building with no elevator. We made 6 trips up the stairs, sweating despite the cold, and by the time we finished, my legs were shaking and the studio looked like a storage unit. This is cozy, Natalie said, trying to sound optimistic as she surveyed the space. It was a single room with a kitchenette along one wall, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a window that overlooked a parking lot. The radiator clanked every 20 minutes like clockwork. It's mine, I said, and that was all that mattered. She helped me unpack the essentials, organizing my clothes into the narrow closet and setting up the futon I'd bought from a second-hand store. We ordered pizza and ate sitting on the floor because I didn't have a table yet. How does it feel? She asked, wiping grease from her fingers with a paper towel. I thought about it. Terrifying. Expensive. But better than staying. She nodded. Your dad tried to stop you? He hasn't said a word to me since the hearing. I don't even think he noticed I was packing. That's probably worse, she said. She wasn't wrong. The silence from my father felt deliberate, like he was erasing me again, but this time in real time. My mother had watched me carry boxes to my car without offering to help or asking where I was going. Ethan had texted once asking if I needed anything, but when I didn't respond, he didn't follow up. It was exactly what I expected, and somehow that made it hurt more. Natalie stayed the night, and we stayed up late talking about everything except my family. She told me about her job at a marketing firm, about the guy she'd been seeing who turned out to be terrible at communication, about the trip to Joshua Tree she was planning for spring. It felt good to think about someone else's life for a while. The next morning, she left early to beat traffic. I stood at the window and watched her car pull out of the lot, feeling the weight of being truly alone settle over me. I spent the rest of the day organizing. I put sheets on the futon, arranged my books on the windowsill, hung a calendar on the wall. Small acts that made the space feel less temporary. That night, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. My phone buzzed with an email from Gregory. Got the first batch of records from your father's attorney. Taking a look now. We'll call tomorrow to discuss. I set the phone down and wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my palms. This was the part I'd been waiting for. The proof. The numbers. The undeniable reality of what he'd done. Gregory called the next afternoon while I was at work. I stepped outside into the cold and answered. Tell me, I said. He sighed. It's not good, Valerie. Your father submitted expense records claiming he spent over $60,000 on property maintenance and repairs over the past 3 years. That's almost all of it. I know. But here's the thing. The receipts don't add up. Some of them are duplicates. Others are for work that was never done. I cross-referenced the contractor names with state licensing databases, and half of them don't exist. He falsified receipts. It looks that way. And there's more. I found deposits into an LLC called Harborview Enterprises. Turns out, that's your brother's restaurant. My stomach dropped. Ethan's restaurant? He's been funneling money from the duplex into his business. Probably calling it a loan or an investment to justify it on paper, but legally, that's conversion of estate assets. Does Ethan know? Hard to say. But whether he knew or not, he benefited. And that makes him part of this. I leaned against the brick wall of the building, feeling the cold seep through my coat. My father hadn't just stolen from me. He'd used my inheritance to fund my brother's dream. What do we do now? I asked. We file a motion to compel a full forensic audit. If the judge sees what I'm seeing, your father's going to have a very hard time explaining this. How long will that take? A few weeks. Maybe a month. But Valerie, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. I know. After we hung up, I stood outside for a long time, watching people walk past, bundled in scarves and hats, living their ordinary lives. I felt like I was trapped in a separate reality, one where families lied and stole and pretended everything was fine. When I finally went back inside, my coworker Rachel was waiting by my desk. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just dealing with some stuff, I said, sitting down and pulling my keyboard toward me. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. I don't mean to pry, but if you need to talk, I'm here. I appreciated the offer, but I didn't know how to explain what I was going through without sounding insane. How do you tell someone that your father stole your inheritance and used it to fund your brother's restaurant? How do you say that out loud and not sound bitter and petty? Thanks, I said. I'm managing. She nodded and walked away, but I could feel her concern lingering. That evening, I went to the grocery store and stood in the frozen food aisle trying to decide between two brands of pasta. It was a stupid thing to get stuck on, but my brain felt too full to make even small decisions. I ended up leaving without buying anything. Back at the apartment, I heated up leftover soup and sat on the futon with my laptop. I opened a blank document and started typing. Not an email, not a letter, just thoughts. Everything I wanted to say to my father but never would. You made me feel like I didn't matter. Like I was an afterthought. Like the only value I had was in staying quiet and not causing problems. You took something that was mine and acted like I didn't deserve it. And the worst part is, you did it so casually. Like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I saved the document and closed the laptop. Writing it didn't make me feel better, but it made the thoughts feel less chaotic. The next week dragged. Work was busy, which helped distract me, but every night I came home to the empty apartment and felt the loneliness settle in like fog. I tried calling Natalie a few times, but she was swamped with a big project and could only talk for a few minutes. On Thursday, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short and to the point. This is Claire. Ethan's girlfriend. Can we meet? I think you deserve to know some things. I stared at the message for a long time. Claire had always seemed nice enough, but she was firmly in Ethan's corner. Why would she want to talk to me now? I typed back. When and where? She suggested a coffee shop downtown on Saturday morning. I agreed, even though every instinct told me it was a bad idea. Saturday came, and I showed up 10 minutes early. The coffee shop was busy, filled with people working on laptops and couples sharing pastries. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching the door. Claire arrived exactly on time, wearing a long coat and oversized sunglasses she didn't take off until she sat down. She looked nervous, glancing around like she was afraid of being seen. Thanks for meeting me, she said, her voice quiet. What's this about? She took a breath. I overheard a conversation between Ethan and your dad last week. They were in the garage, and I was inside. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they were talking loud enough that I could hear through the door. I waited. Your dad was telling Ethan to keep quiet about the money. He said if Ethan cooperated, he'd make sure the restaurant stayed funded. But if Ethan talked to you or the lawyer, he'd pull everything. My hands tightened around the coffee cup. So Ethan knows. He knows, Claire confirmed. And he's terrified. The restaurant's bleeding money. He's already behind on vendor payments. Without your dad's help, he's going to lose everything. That's not my problem. I know, she said quickly. And I'm not asking you to drop the case or anything like that. I just thought you should know what you're up against. Your dad's not going to back down. And Ethan's too scared to stand up to him. Why are you telling me this? She looked down at her hands. Because it's not right. I've watched your family treat you like you're invisible for months. And when I heard that conversation, I realized they're never going to do the right thing unless someone forces them to. I studied her face, trying to figure out if this was genuine or some kind of setup. But she looked sincere. Uncomfortable, but sincere. Does Ethan know you're here? I asked. No. And he can't find out. Please. I nodded slowly. Okay. Thank you for telling me. She stood, pulling her sunglasses back on. I hope you get what you deserve, Valerie. I really do. She left quickly, and I sat there alone, processing what she'd said. My father was bribing Ethan with my money. And Ethan was letting him. I texted Gregory. Need to talk. Call when you can. He called 20 minutes later. What's going on? I told him about the conversation with Claire, about the garage, about the threat to pull funding if Ethan cooperated. That's witness intimidation, Gregory said. If we can prove it, it strengthens our case significantly. But we'd need Claire to testify, and it sounds like she's not willing to go on record. She's not, I said. But at least we know what we're dealing with. Keep documenting everything, he said. And Valerie? Watch your back. Your father's playing hardball now. After we hung up, I walked around downtown for a while, trying to clear my head. I passed the bookstore where I used to go with my grandmother. She'd buy me a new book every time we visited, and we'd sit in the cafe reading together for hours. I wondered what she'd think of all this. If she'd be proud of me for fighting or disappointed that it had come to this. I wanted to believe she'd understand. That she'd tell me to keep going. Back at the apartment, I found an envelope taped to my door. No return address, just my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. Drop the case. You're only hurting yourself. No signature. No threat, exactly, but the implication was clear. I took a photo of it and sent it to Gregory, then locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle. I didn't sleep well that night. The forensic audit took 3 weeks. During that time, I barely heard from anyone in my family. My mother called once to ask if I'd picked up a package that was delivered to the house by mistake. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Ethan didn't reach out at all. Gregory called in late February with an update. The auditor's preliminary findings are in. Your father claimed over $60,000 in expenses, but only about $15,000 can be verified. The rest is either fabricated or misappropriated. So we have him. Not yet. His attorney is going to argue that the records were lost or poorly maintained. We need to be ready for that. But yes, the evidence is strong. What about the transfers to Ethan's restaurant? Those are documented. $42,000 over 2 years. Your father listed them as property improvement loans, but there's no repayment schedule, no signed agreement, nothing that would make them legally binding loans. So he just gave Ethan my money. That's what it looks like. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For so long, I doubted myself, wondered if I was overreacting, if maybe my father had a legitimate reason for what he did. But now I had proof. Undeniable, documented proof. When's the next hearing? I asked. March 9th. 3 weeks from today. The judge will review the audit and hear arguments. After that, he'll make a ruling. And if we win? Your father will have to return the misappropriated funds, plus interest. The property will be transferred into your and Ethan's names jointly, as the will specifies. And there may be penalties for the fraudulent expense claims. And if we lose? Then you're out of options. But I don't think we're going to lose. I thanked him and hung up, then sat on the futon staring at the wall. 3 more weeks. 3 more weeks until I'd know if this was all worth it. I spent the next few days in a strange limbo. Work kept me busy during the day, but at night, the apartment felt too quiet. I started leaving the TV on just for background noise. One evening, Aunt Lorraine called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Valerie, honey, I heard about the audit. Are you doing okay? I'm fine. You don't sound fine. I'm tired, I admitted. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of feeling like the bad guy. I'm tired of all of it. She was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, you know. I don't know about that. I do. She always said you were the strong one. The one who wouldn't let people push her around. She'd hate what Kenneth did, and she'd hate what it's doing to this family. But she wouldn't hate you for standing up. I felt tears prick at my eyes. Thanks, Aunt Lorraine. I mean it. And Valerie? When this is over, no matter how it turns out, you'll still be the one who did the right thing. Don't forget that. After we hung up, I cried for the first time in weeks. Not out of sadness, exactly, but out of exhaustion. Out of the sheer weight of carrying this alone. But I wasn't going to stop now. I was too close. The days crept by slowly. I marked them off on the calendar, counting down to March 9th. I prepared myself for every possible outcome, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd react, how I'd keep myself together no matter what happened. And then, finally, the day arrived. The courthouse felt different this time. The same glass doors, the same security checkpoint, the same echoing hallways, but everything carried more weight. Gregory met me in the lobby wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be. We walked together to the same courtroom where the preliminary hearing had been held. This time, the benches were fuller. I spotted Aunt Lorraine sitting in the third row, giving me a small encouraging nod. Behind her sat a few people I didn't recognize, probably there for other cases on the docket. My father was already seated at his table with his attorney. He wore a charcoal suit and a burgundy tie, looking every bit the respectable businessman. He didn't glance my way when I entered. Ethan wasn't there. I'd expected him to show up, to sit behind our father in a show of solidarity, but his absence spoke volumes. Either he was too ashamed or he'd been told to stay away. The judge entered promptly at 9, and we all stood. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and opened the file in front of him. We're here today for the matter of the estate of Margaret Brooks. I've reviewed the forensic audit submitted by the petitioner's counsel, as well as the response from the executor. Let's begin with the findings. Gregory stood. Your Honor, the audit reveals significant discrepancies in the expense claim submitted by Mr. Kenneth Brooks. Of the $63,000 claimed, only $14,800 can be verified through legitimate receipts and contractor records. The remaining $48,000 is either undocumented or fraudulent. The judge looked at my father's attorney. Counselor? She rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that some records were lost or inadequately maintained during a difficult period following Mrs. Brooks' death. However, the work was performed. The property required extensive repairs, including roof work, plumbing updates, and electrical system overhauls. The fact that receipts are unavailable doesn't mean the expenses were fabricated. Gregory responded immediately. Your Honor, we're not talking about misplaced receipts. We're talking about contractors that don't exist. We contacted every business listed in the expense report. 12 of them have no record of ever working at 428 Riverside Avenue. 5 of them aren't even licensed in Oregon. This isn't poor record keeping. This is fraud. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of someone shifting in their seat. The judge made a note, then looked up. What about the transfers to Harborview Enterprises? Gregory nodded. Your Honor, Harborview Enterprises is a restaurant owned by Ethan Brooks, the decedent's grandson and the petitioner's brother. Over a 2-year period, Mr. Kenneth Brooks transferred $42,000 from rental income into this business. He listed these as property improvement loans, but no loan documents exist. No repayment schedule, no interest terms, no collateral. These were gifts disguised as business expenses. The judge turned to the defense attorney. Response? Your Honor, my client provided financial support to his son's business venture with the understanding that it would be repaid once the restaurant became profitable. The informal nature of the arrangement doesn't negate its legitimacy. But there's no documentation, the judge said. No promissory note, no signed agreement of any kind? The attorney hesitated. The parties operated on trust, Your Honor. It's not uncommon in family business arrangements. Gregory seized the opening. Your Honor, this wasn't a family business. This was estate property with designated beneficiaries. Mr. Brooks had no authority to use those funds for personal family loans. The will explicitly states that the property and its income were to be divided equally between both grandchildren. Instead, he diverted nearly all of it to one grandchild while denying the other any benefit whatsoever. The judge sat back, tapping his pen against the desk. "Miss Brooks, I'd like to hear from you directly. Can you stand, please?" My heart lurched. Gregory had warned me this might happen, but I hadn't fully believed it. I stood, my legs unsteady. "How long have you known about the discrepancies in your grandmother's estate?" the judge asked. "I found out in December," I said, keeping my voice level. "My father told me the duplex was in a trust and that the income was being managed for future distribution. But when I looked up the property records, I saw it was only in his name. That's when I started investigating." "And you never received any rental income from this property?" "Not a single dollar, Your Honor." "Did your grandmother discuss her intentions with you before she passed?" "Yes. She told me and my brother that the duplex was for both of us, so we'd always have security. She said it was important to her that we have something of our own." The judge made another note. "Thank you. You may sit." I lowered myself back into the chair, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The judge reviewed his notes for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mr. Kenneth Brooks exceeded his authority as executor. The expense claims are insufficiently documented and appear to include fraudulent entries. The transfers to Harborview Enterprises were unauthorized distributions that violated the terms of the will." My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Therefore, I'm ordering the following. First, the property at 428 Riverside Avenue will be transferred immediately into the joint names of Valerie Brooks and Ethan Brooks, with equal ownership shares as specified in the original will. Second, Mr. Kenneth Brooks will reimburse the estate $48,000 for misappropriated funds. Third, he will pay an additional $12,000 in penalties and court costs. Payment is due within 60 days. The gavel came down, sharp and final. I exhaled slowly, feeling something release in my chest. Gregory reached over and squeezed my shoulder briefly. "We won," he said quietly. But it didn't feel like winning. "Not yet." My father stood abruptly and walked out without looking at me. His attorney gathered her papers and followed, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Aunt Lorraine came up to me as people began filing out of the courtroom. She pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick. So proud. Thanks for being here." "Always, honey. Always." Gregory and I stayed behind to finalize some paperwork with the court clerk. The process was tedious, full of forms and signatures and instructions about next steps. By the time we finished, the courthouse was nearly empty. Outside, the sky had turned gray and threatening. Gregory walked me to my car. "This is a good outcome, Valerie. You should feel good about it." I nodded, but I felt hollow. Vindicated, yes. Relieved, yes. But also profoundly sad. "What happens now?" I asked. "Your father has 60 days to pay. If he doesn't, we can file for enforcement and potentially attach other assets. The property transfer will happen within 2 weeks once the title company processes the paperwork." "And Ethan?" "He'll be listed as co-owner, which means he's entitled to half the rental income going forward. But he doesn't get retroactive payments. That money's gone." I thanked Gregory and drove home slowly, barely noticing the traffic. When I got back to the apartment, I sat on the futon and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Congratulations. Hope it was worth destroying your family." I deleted it without responding. Another text came through, this time from Natalie. Lorraine texted me. "You won. I'm so happy for you. Call me when you can." I called her, and she answered on the first ring. "Tell me everything," she demanded. I recounted the hearing, the judge's ruling, the moment the gavel came down. She cheered and hooped, and I found myself smiling despite everything. You did it, Val. You actually did it. Yeah, I said. I did. How do you feel? I don't know yet. Ask me in a week. Fair enough. Listen, I'm coming down this weekend. We're celebrating. No arguments. I laughed. Okay. Deal. After we hung up, I made tea and sat by the window watching the rain start to fall. The radiator clanked, and somewhere in the building, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary building, but they felt comforting in a way the silence at my father's house never had. Over the next few days, the reality of the ruling began to sink in. Gregory emailed me copies of all the court documents. I read through them multiple times, making sure I understood every detail. The property transfer paperwork arrived the following week. I had to sign in 3 different places and get the signatures notarized. When it was done, I held the document in my hands and stared at my name. Valerie Brooks, co-owner. It was real. Ethan finally called on a Thursday evening. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Valerie, he said when I picked up. His voice sounded strained. Can we talk? We're talking now. I mean in person. Coffee or something. Why? Because I owe you an apology. A real one. I hesitated. Fine. Tomorrow at noon. That coffee shop on 3rd Street. I'll be there. He showed up 5 minutes late, looking thinner than I remembered. His hair was uncombed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He ordered a coffee and sat down across from me without meeting my gaze. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For not standing up to Dad. For taking the money. For letting you get cut out. Why didn't you say something? I asked. You knew what he was doing. I was scared, he admitted. The restaurant's failing, Val. I'm drowning in debt. I thought if I just kept quiet, if I just did what Dad wanted, he'd keep helping me. But all I did was make it worse. You let him steal from me, I said flatly. I know. And I can't take that back. But I want you to know I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't know he was forging receipts or lying about expenses. I just knew he was giving me money, and I was too desperate to question where it came from. That doesn't make it okay. I know it doesn't. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. I talked to a bankruptcy attorney. I'm closing the restaurant. I can't keep it afloat, and I don't want to keep taking money that isn't mine. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sorry for him. What about Dad? I asked. He's furious. Hasn't spoken to me since the ruling. Mom's not much better. They're acting like I betrayed them by not lying for them in court. You didn't testify. Because I couldn't lie under oath. And I couldn't tell the truth without destroying everything. So I just didn't show up. Coward's way out, I said. Yeah, he agreed. It was. We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the coffee shop filling the space between us. Finally, Ethan spoke again. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know I'm not fighting you on the property. Whatever you want to do with it, I'll support. I nodded slowly. I'm turning it into affordable housing. People who need a break, people who've been shut out. I'm working with a nonprofit to manage it. He looked surprised. That's really great, Val. Grandma would have loved that. I hope so. He stood, leaving his coffee half finished. I should go. But thank you for meeting me. And for not giving up. Even when we gave you every reason to. After he left, I sat there for a long time, processing the conversation. Ethan wasn't off the hook, not by a long shot. But at least he was trying to own what he'd done. That was more than my father had ever managed. That weekend, Natalie came down as promised. She brought champagne and takeout, and we sat on the floor of my apartment eating Thai food and toasting to small victories. To Valerie Brooks, she said, raising her plastic cup. The woman who wouldn't back down. We drank, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to happiness. The following Monday, I met with a woman named Sandra Liu who ran a nonprofit housing organization. Gregory had connected us, knowing I wanted to do something meaningful with the property. Sandra was in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened as I explained what I wanted to do. The duplex has 2 units. I want to rent them at below market rates to people who are trying to rebuild. Single parents, people coming out of bad situations, anyone who needs stability and can't afford what landlords are charging. Sandra smiled. That's exactly the kind of housing we need more of. How involved do you want to be? I want to be part of it, but I need help with management. Screening tenants, handling repairs, all of that. We can do that. Our organization has property managers who specialize in affordable housing. You'd retain ownership, but we'd handle the day-to-day operations. Perfect. She pulled out a folder. I took the liberty of drafting a partnership agreement. Take a look and let me know if anything needs adjusting. I skimmed through it. The terms were fair, the expectations clear. I signed it that afternoon. Within 2 weeks, Sandra's team had begun preparing the units. They deep-cleaned both apartments, made minor repairs, and even painted the trim a cheerful yellow. I stopped by one afternoon to see the progress. A young woman was standing on the porch, talking to one of Sandra's staff. She had a baby on her hip and looked exhausted but hopeful. "Is this the place?" she asked. "It is," the staff member said. "Would you like to see inside?" The woman nodded eagerly, and they disappeared through the door. I stood on the sidewalk, watching through the window as the staff member showed her around. The woman touched the walls gently, as if she couldn't believe it was real. Sandra came up beside me. "That's Kiara. Single mom, working 2 jobs, just got out of a shelter. This place is going to change her life." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Good. That's what it's for. Your grandmother would be proud," Sandra said. I hoped she was right. By mid-April, both units were occupied. Kiara moved into the left side with her daughter. A veteran named Marcus took the right unit. Both paid rent that was a fraction of market rate, and both were so grateful it made my chest ache. I visited once a month to check in, not as a landlord but as someone who wanted to make sure things were working. Kiara always had fresh flowers on her kitchen table. Marcus kept the front porch swept clean. One afternoon, Kiara caught me as I was leaving. She handed me a folded piece of paper. "My daughter made this for you," she said. I unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing of a house with 2 stick figures standing in front. One tall, one small. Above it, in wobbly letters, it said "Thank you." I looked up, blinking back tears. "Tell her I love it." Kiara smiled. "You gave us a chance when no one else would. That matters more than you know." I drove home that day feeling lighter than I had in months. The property wasn't just a symbol of what I'd won. It was proof that I could take something broken and make it whole again. My father never paid the $48,000. The 60-day deadline came and went, and Gregory filed for enforcement. The court attached a lien to my parents' house on Maple Ridge Drive. My mother called me once, her voice icy. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You've humiliated your father and jeopardized our home." "He did that himself," I replied, and hung up. I didn't hear from her again. Ethan kept his word. He didn't interfere with the property, didn't ask for his share of the rental income. He closed the restaurant in May and took a job managing a small bistro across town. We didn't talk often, but when we did, the conversations were civil. Aunt Lorraine called every few weeks to check in. She was the only one from the family who stayed in touch, and I cherished those calls more than I could say. By summer, my life had settled into a new rhythm. I still worked at the nonprofit, still lived in the studio apartment with the clanking radiator. But I didn't feel stuck anymore. I felt free. The duplex became a place I visited not out of obligation but out of pride. I'd sit on the porch with Kiera sometimes, watching her daughter play in the yard, and feel like I'd finally done something that mattered. One evening in late June, I stood on that porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The street was quiet, the air warm. I thought about my grandmother, about the life she'd wanted for me, about the legacy she'd tried to leave. I thought about my father, too. About the choices he'd made and the family he'd broken. Part of me wondered if he regretted it. If he lay awake at night thinking about what he'd lost. But mostly, I thought about myself. About the girl who'd sat at a folding table during Christmas dinner, treated like a stranger in her own home. About the woman who'd refused to stay silent. I didn't forgive my father. I didn't think I ever would. But I didn't need his apology anymore. I didn't need his approval or his acknowledgement or his love. I had something better. I had my name on a deed. I had a family I'd chosen. I had a life I'd built on my own terms. And that was enough. The first anniversary of the court ruling arrived on a Tuesday. I woke up in the studio apartment that no longer felt temporary, made coffee in the small kitchenette, and watched the morning light filter through the window. A year ago, I'd been sitting in a courtroom listening to a judge validate everything I'd fought for. Today, I was simply living. The difference felt enormous. I'd taken the day off work, not for any particular reason except that it felt significant. Milestones deserved acknowledgement, even the ones that came wrapped in pain and complicated feelings. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. 1 year since you became a certified badass. Proud of you, friend. I smiled and typed back. Thanks for sticking with me through all of it. Always. Portland misses you though. Come visit soon. I will. Promise. After breakfast, I drove to the duplex. It had become a weekly ritual, stopping by to check on things, to make sure everything was running smoothly. But mostly I went because it grounded me. Reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. Kiera was outside watering the small flower garden she'd planted along the walkway. Her daughter, now 2 years old, was toddling around the grass chasing a butterfly. Morning, Valerie, Kiera called out, waving. Morning. Garden's looking beautiful. She beamed. I never had space for plants before. This place gave me that. Her daughter ran over and wrapped her arms around my legs in an enthusiastic hug. I lifted her up, and she giggled, pointing at the butterfly that had landed on the fence. Butterfly, she said proudly. That's right. Very good. Kiera took her from me, settling her on her hip. I've been meaning to tell you something. I got a promotion at work. Full benefits, better hours. I'm finally starting to save money. That's incredible, Kiera. I'm so happy for you. It's because of this place, she said, her voice catching slightly. Because you gave me stability. I could never have focused on work when I was worried about keeping a roof over our heads. You did the work. I just provided the space. She shook her head. You did more than that. You believed people like me deserved a chance. Marcus came out of his unit then, carrying a toolbox. He nodded at both of us. Morning. The porch railing's getting loose. Thought I'd tighten it up if that's okay. Absolutely, I said. Thank you. No problem. Place has been good to me. Least I can do. He set to work, and I stood there for a moment taking it all in. This was what my grandmother had wanted. Not just property, not just income, but security. Community. A foundation for people to build their lives on. I said goodbye to Kiera and Marcus and drove across town to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. I hadn't visited in months, and I felt a pang of guilt about that as I walked through the rows of headstones looking for hers. Margaret Ellen Brooks. Beloved mother and grandmother. Her stone was simple, unadorned, exactly like she would have wanted. I sat down on the grass beside it, pulling my knees to my chest. Hi, Grandma, I'm sorry it's been so long. I brought you some news though. The duplex is doing exactly what you hoped it would. There's a young mom there with a little girl, and a veteran who keeps the place running like clockwork. They're building lives there. Real lives. I think you'd like them. The wind rustled through the trees, and I closed my eyes, imagining her response. She'd always been practical, never sentimental, but fiercely protective of the people she loved. Dad never paid back the money, I continued. They had to put a lien on the house. Mom blames me for it. I don't think they'll ever forgive me, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I spent so long trying to earn their approval, and it turned out I didn't need it. I just needed to stop waiting for permission to take up space. I stayed for another 20 minutes, pulling weeds from around the headstone, straightening the small American flag someone had placed there. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter. That evening, I met Sandra for dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. We'd become friends over the past year, bonding over our shared commitment to housing justice and our mutual frustration with bureaucratic red tape. So, she said, raising her glass of wine. 1 year down. How does it feel? Surreal, I admitted. Some days I still can't believe I actually did it. You should believe it. You took on your own family and won. That takes guts. Or stubbornness. She laughed. Sometimes they're the same thing. But seriously, Valerie, what you've done with that property is making a real difference. Kiara tells everyone about you. Marcus too. They're both thriving. That means everything to me. Have you thought about expanding? Sandra asked. There are other properties out there. Other families who could use what you're offering. I have thought about it, I said slowly. But I'm not sure I'm ready yet. This past year has been about healing as much as anything else. Fair enough. But when you are ready, I'm here. We finished dinner and walked outside into the cool evening air. The streets were busy with people heading to bars and shows, living their ordinary lives. I felt a pang of envy, not for their circumstances, but for their simplicity. For the luxury of not having your family become your adversary. But I also felt grateful. Grateful that I'd survived it. That I'd come out the other side intact. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I opened it, expecting some new legal challenge from my father. Instead, it was a notice that the lien on my parents' house had been satisfied. Kenneth and Diane Brooks had paid the outstanding debt in full. I sat down heavily on the futon, staring at the paper. He'd finally paid. After more than a year of silence and refusal, he'd come up with the money. I called Gregory immediately. Did you know about this? Just found out myself this morning, he said. The payment came through yesterday. Cashier's check, full amount plus accumulated interest. Why now? My guess? They're trying to sell the house. Can't do that with a lien attached. But that's just speculation. So it's over. Really over. Legally? Yes. Emotionally? That's up to you. After we hung up, I sat with the news for a long time. Part of me had expected my father to never pay, to let the lien sit there indefinitely out of spite. The fact that he'd paid felt anticlimactic somehow. Not like closure, just like the end of a transaction. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer with all the other legal documents. Then I went about my day. Autumn came, bringing cooler temperatures and trees that blazed orange and red. I started volunteering at the nonprofit housing organization Sandra ran, helping with intake interviews and tenant support. It felt good to be on the other side of the desk, helping people navigate the same systems I'd struggled with. One afternoon, I was conducting an interview with a woman in her 40s who was trying to find housing after leaving an abusive relationship. She sat across from me with her hands folded tightly in her lap, answering my questions in a voice barely above a whisper. I know this is hard, I said gently. But everything you tell me stays confidential. I'm just trying to understand what you need so we can help. I don't have much, she said. No references, no rental history for the past 5 years. My credit's destroyed. I know I'm probably not going to qualify for anything. I looked at her application, seeing myself in every blank space, every gap that told a story of survival rather than failure. Let me see what I can do, I said. I worked with Sandra to get her approved for one of our partner properties. It wasn't the duplex, which was still occupied, but a small apartment in a similar program. When I called to tell her she'd been accepted, she cried. Thank you, she kept saying. You don't know what this means. But I did know. I knew exactly what it meant. In November, I received a phone call from Ethan. We'd maintained sporadic contact over the past year, mostly brief texts on birthdays and holidays. Hearing his voice was unexpected. Hey, Val. Do you have a minute? Sure. What's up? I wanted to let you know that Mom and Dad are selling the house. They're moving to Arizona. Some retirement community near Phoenix. I processed this information slowly. When? Closing's in December. They'll be gone by New Year's. Did they ask you to tell me? No, he said quickly. They don't know I'm calling. I just thought you should know. Thanks for telling me. There was a long pause. Valerie, I know things are still complicated between us. But I want you to know I'm doing better. I got promoted at the bistro. I'm managing the whole front of house now. And I've been going to therapy. That's really good, Ethan. I'm glad. The therapist helped me understand how much I enabled Dad. How much I looked the other way because it benefited me. I can't undo that, but I'm trying to be better. I appreciate you telling me that. I don't expect us to be close again. But maybe someday we can be okay. Like, civil family instead of estranged family. Maybe, I said. I'd like that. After we hung up, I stood at the window of my apartment looking out at the parking lot. My parents were leaving Oregon. Moving across the country to start over somewhere new. Part of me wondered if they were running from the shame of what had happened, trying to escape the whispers and the judgment. But mostly I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness, just a quiet acceptance that they'd made their choice and I'd made mine. Christmas came again, exactly 1 year after the dinner that had changed everything. Natalie invited me to Portland to spend the holiday with her family, and I accepted gratefully. Her parents were warm and welcoming, treating me like I'd always been part of their celebrations. On Christmas morning, Natalie's mom made pancakes and bacon, and we all sat around their kitchen table in pajamas exchanging small gifts and telling stories. It was casual and chaotic and nothing like the formal dinners I'd grown up with. This is nice, I told Natalie later as we washed dishes together. My family's pretty low-key, she said. But they're good people. They really are. You're always welcome here, you know. Anytime. I hugged her, feeling grateful for friends who became family when family stopped feeling like home. I drove back to Ashford on December 26th, the roads quiet and the sky overcast. When I got home, there was a package waiting outside my door. No return address, just my name written in handwriting I recognized. I brought it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a photo album, old and worn, with a note tucked into the first page. Valerie, I found this while packing. Thought you might want it. Aunt Lorraine. I opened the album slowly. It was filled with photos of my grandmother. Pictures I'd never seen before. Her as a young woman standing in front of the duplex with a for sale sign. Her sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. Her in the garden, dirt on her knees, smiling at the camera. Tucked between the pages was a letter in her handwriting, yellowed with age. It was addressed to both me and Ethan. To my darling grandchildren, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, but I hope the duplex is serving you well. I bought that property with my first real paycheck, back when women buying property alone was unusual. It gave me independence and security when I needed it most. I want the same for both of you. Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. Don't let anyone diminish what you've earned. Build your own foundations. Love, Grandma. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. She'd known. She'd known how important it was to have something of your own, something no one could take away. I placed the letter carefully back in the album and set it on the shelf next to the other photos I'd collected over the past year. My life was slowly filling with images and moments that belonged to me, untouched by my father's narrative. January arrived with freezing rain and gray skies. I spent the first week of the new year organizing my apartment, finally hanging artwork on the walls and buying a small kitchen table so I didn't have to eat on the futon anymore. One afternoon, Sandra called. I have someone I want you to meet. Can you come by the office? When I arrived, there was a young woman sitting in the waiting room. She couldn't have been more than 22, with tired eyes and a nervous energy. Sandra introduced us. Valerie, this is Ashley. Ashley, this is the woman I told you about. The one who owns the duplex. Ashley stood and shook my hand. Thank you for meeting me. Of course. What can I help you with? She explained her situation. She'd aged out of foster care 3 years ago and had been bouncing between shelters and friends' couches ever since. She had a job at a grocery store and had been saving every penny, but couldn't find anyone willing to rent to her without references or credit history. I've been on every waiting list in the city, she said. But it's all a year or more. I just need a chance. I looked at Sandra, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Marcus is moving out next month, I said. He got a job in Seattle and found a place closer to work. That means the right unit is opening up. Ashley's eyes widened. Are you serious? If you're interested, I'd like to offer it to you. Same terms as the other tenants. Below market rent, month-to-month lease, no credit check required. She started crying, covering her face with her hands. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just can't believe this is real. It's real, I said gently. And you deserve it. Sandra helped her fill out the paperwork, and within 2 weeks, Ashley moved into the duplex. She arrived with 2 garbage bags of belongings and a determination I recognized in myself. Over the following months, I watched her flourish the same way Kiara had. She painted the walls a soft blue. She adopted a cat from the shelter. She started taking online classes toward a degree in social work. Every time I visited, she thanked me. Every single time. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and longer days. I'd been at the nonprofit for over 2 years now, and my supervisor approached me about taking on a leadership role. It meant more responsibility and a modest pay increase, but more importantly, it meant influence. The ability to shape programs and advocate for the people we served. I accepted. The promotion came with a small celebration, my coworkers gathering in the break room with store-bought cake and warm wishes. Rachel, who'd asked me years ago how I was doing, pulled me aside. I'm really proud of you, she said. You've come so far. It doesn't always feel that way, I admitted. Trust me. We've all noticed. You're not the same person who started here. That evening, I called Aunt Lorraine to tell her about the promotion. That's wonderful news, honey. Your grandmother would be over the moon. I hope so. Sometimes I still wonder if I did the right thing. Taking Dad to court. Burning all those bridges. She was quiet for a moment. Valerie, let me tell you something. Your father made his choices long before you made yours. He chose money over integrity. He chose favoritism over fairness. You just chose to stop pretending it was okay. Do you ever talk to them? I asked. Your mother calls occasionally. Surface-level stuff. How's the weather? Did you see this news story? Your father and I haven't spoken since the ruling. He's too proud to admit he was wrong, and I'm too tired to pretend he wasn't. I'm sorry you lost your brother over this. Honey, I lost my brother years ago. I just didn't realize it until you forced everyone to look at the truth. We talked for another hour, and when we finally hung up, I felt anchored. Connected to something that mattered. Summer came again, marking the second anniversary of the court ruling. This time, I didn't take the day off. I went to work, attended meetings, helped a client navigate an eviction notice. The day was significant, but it didn't define me anymore. That evening, I met Natalie for dinner. She'd driven down for the weekend, and we sat on a patio overlooking the river, watching boats drift by. 2 years, she said, clinking her glass against mine. Look at you now. I smiled. Look at me now. Do you ever regret it? Going through with everything? I thought about it. Sometimes I regret how it happened. I wish my family had just done the right thing without me having to force them. But do I regret standing up for myself? Never. Good. Because you're kind of my hero. I laughed. Your standards are too low. My standards are just right, she said firmly. We spent the evening talking about her job, her boyfriend who'd finally learned to communicate, her plans to move to a bigger apartment. Normal things. Easy things. The kind of conversations that felt like medicine after years of crisis. When I got home that night, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea, listening to the sounds of the city settling into sleep. Somewhere in Arizona, my parents were living their new life. Somewhere across town, Ethan was probably closing up the bistro. Somewhere in the duplex, Kiera and Ashley were tucking in for the night, safe and stable. And I was here. In an apartment I paid for with money I earned. Surrounded by things I'd chosen. Living a life I'd built from the ground up. It wasn't perfect. I still had hard days. I still felt the loss of what my family could have been. But I also had something my father had tried to take from me. My dignity. My voice. My worth. 3 years after that Christmas dinner, I was sitting in Sandra's office discussing expansion possibilities. The duplex had been so successful that we were exploring the idea of acquiring more properties, creating a network of affordable housing throughout the city. What if we started a fund? Sandra suggested. People could donate specifically toward acquiring buildings for this purpose. You'd be the public face, the success story that inspires others to invest. I don't know if I want to be the face of anything, I said hesitantly. Think about it. Your story is powerful. Woman fights her own family to reclaim her grandmother's legacy, then transforms it into something that helps dozens of people. That's the kind of narrative that moves donors. I took the proposal home and read through it carefully. The idea made me uncomfortable, not because I was ashamed of what I'd done, but because I'd spent so long trying to be invisible that stepping into the spotlight felt unnatural. But then I thought about Ashley, about the way her face had looked when I told her the apartment was hers. I thought about Kiera's daughter, who now had stability she'd never known before. I thought about all the other Ashleys and Kieras out there, waiting for someone to take a chance on them. I called Sandra the next day. Let's do it. We launched the fund 3 months later with a small event at a community center. I gave a speech, talking about my grandmother's vision and how it had evolved into something larger. I talked about the importance of housing security and the dignity that comes with having a place to call your own. When I finished, people came up to shake my hand, to share their own stories of housing insecurity, to write checks for the fund. An elderly woman pressed a $20 bill into my palm. It's all I can give, she said. But I want to be part of this. Every dollar matters, I told her. Thank you. By the end of the night, we'd raised $40,000. Enough to start looking at a second property. I drove home that night feeling exhausted and exhilarated. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not forgiving, but transforming pain into purpose. For years after the Christmas dinner, I stood on the porch of our third property, a small house that would be divided into studio apartments for young adults aging out of foster care. Ashley was with me, now working as a case manager for the housing program. Remember when this was you? I asked her. Every day, she said. That's why I wanted to work here. So I could be the person I needed back then. The house needed work, but it had good bones. Strong foundation. Solid walls. Just like the people we'd be helping. My phone rang. It was Ethan, calling on my birthday like he'd done for the past 2 years. Our relationship was still distant, still careful, but it existed. That felt like progress. Happy birthday, Val. Thanks. How are things? Good. Really good actually. I'm seeing someone. She's a teacher. You'd like her. I'm happy for you. Listen, I know this is probably a long shot, but I'm having a small dinner next month to celebrate my sobriety anniversary. 1 year. I'd really like you to be there. I was quiet, processing. Ethan had been in recovery for a year? I didn't know you were in a program, I said finally. I wasn't ready to tell anyone. But I'm telling you now. And I'd really like you to come. No pressure though. I understand if you're not ready. I'll think about it, I said. And Ethan? I'm proud of you. His voice cracked slightly. That means a lot. More than you know. After we hung up, I stood on that porch for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky. Forgiveness was complicated. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in small moments. In phone calls. In invitations. In the slow rebuilding of trust. I didn't know if I'd go to Ethan's dinner. But I appreciated being asked. 5 years after the Christmas dinner, I bought a house. Not an investment property, not something to rent out, but a home for myself. It was small, a 2-bedroom bungalow on the east side with a front porch and a yard big enough for a garden. Natalie helped me move in, along with Sandra and Ashley and a few friends from work. We carried boxes up the steps, arranged furniture, hung pictures on walls that belonged to me. This is perfect, Natalie said, standing in the middle of the living room. So completely you. I looked around at the space I'd created. Books on shelves. Art on walls. Plants in sunny windows. Every detail chosen deliberately, reflecting who I'd become. That night, after everyone left, I sat on my front porch with a glass of wine, watching fireflies blink in the growing darkness. Somewhere in this city, people were living in homes I'd helped provide. Somewhere in Arizona, my parents were living lives I was no longer part of. Somewhere across town, Ethan was working on his recovery. And I was here. In a house I'd bought with money I'd earned through work I believed in. Surrounded by family I'd chosen and friendships I'd nurtured. The girl who'd sat at that folding table 5 Christmases ago would hardly recognize the woman I'd become. That girl had been seeking permission to exist. This woman created her own space. I thought about sending my father a photo of the house, just to show him what I'd built without his approval. But I didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. His opinion had stopped mattering the moment I'd stopped seeking it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and texted Aunt Lorraine. Just moved into my new house. Wish Grandma could see it. Her response came quickly. She can, honey. And she's so proud. I sat there until the stars came out, feeling grateful for the battles I'd fought and the peace I'd earned. The road had been long and painful and lonely at times. But it had led me here. To this porch. This house. This life. And that made every hard moment worth it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.